Hey everyone, so for today's video I'm going to be taking a look at 3.18, which is still in PTU. I know that I'm a little bit late on this, but I did start on making a video all the way back in December when this first went live to Wave 1, and here we are now a few months later and it's still in the PTU. But hey, it's not a bad thing that they're trying to take the time to make sure that they get this relatively big patch right before they push it out to live, so that you do have a semi-stable version still available to play while they're working through the issues with this one. So in this video, I mainly just want to focus on the salvage content, and I'm going to get a little bit into the racing stuff. But before we get started, I'm going to do a little bit of self-promo. So you've probably noticed that I haven't been uploading as much over the past few months, and that's mostly been just because I haven't been playing the game as much, but it's also because I've been spending a lot more of my free time doing music production. And my first release is going to be coming out on the 20th, which is probably the day you're seeing this video. So this has nothing to do with Star Citizen really, but I'd still appreciate it if you guys went over to any of the major streaming platforms and gave it a look, and I'll include links to that in the description. Thanks as always for your support. Alright, so starting off with Salvage, this is the major thing for this patch, at least gameplay wise. And for my initial impressions, it looks to be another great addition to the verse, even if it is a little bit simplistic at the moment. But yeah, I'm really glad to see that there's actually new gameplay with this patch, even though there are already significant changes to the backend with stuff like persistent entity streaming. So this first implementation of Salvage only includes hull scraping, which means you can harvest the material on the surface of the hull of ships, but at least for now the frame of the ship isn't really useful for anything. But the way this works is you basically can go up to any wreck in one of the two salvage ships that are currently in-game, either the Vulture and the Reclaimer, and if you're in the Vulture, you just hit M to enter salvage mode, similar to like what you do in a prospector to enter mining mode, and then you've got some beams that go ahead and strip the hull and place the salvage into the ship's salvage processor. So I know there's been a lot of criticism of everything sort of being reduced to a beam in Star Citizen. We already have mining that occurs using beams, all the healing guns use beams, and now we have salvage that's being done with a beam. But I think in this case it actually makes sense, because we already use lasers to do stuff like engravings on metal and other objects today, so it's not too much of a stretch to see that being used for scraping valuable materials off the hulls of ships in the future. So it's nice to see something included that doesn't have to be changed in the future to support this game's goal of being realistic. But yeah, with this being the only option for the moment, I think the Vulture is the better option out of the two ships to use for this gameplay loop at the moment, and it definitely is if you're going solo. The Reclaimer is going to be great once you can use that claw to actually process the entirety of a ship, and I imagine that'll be much more lucrative than the materials that you'll get from just scraping the hull of a ship. But at the moment, the Vulture is super convenient to use for that. Also, until the Reclaimer has functional docking ports so that it can dock at most stations, it's a real pain to get anywhere because your options are to either take off from a landing zone on a planet, which takes forever and is barely possible, or to take off from Grimhex, which you should be fine doing because the Reclaimer has pretty big shields, but I doubt you'll be able to sell a ton of salvage to Grimhex because their inventory counts are usually pretty low. I imagine this issue can be fixed before the claw becomes functional though, so hopefully we get that sooner rather than later, and you don't have to deal with the Reclaimer being barely flyable in atmosphere for much longer. Although if you do want to go multi-crew, 3 people in a Reclaimer could do really well, because with that ship's turret setup you can create the salvage yourself. The manned turrets with size 5s are nothing to mess around with, and even the remote turrets do decent damage. Although I was having a glitch where the targeting for the remote turrets wouldn't show up at all, so it was a massive pain to deal with these small fighters here with no targeting pip at all. Thankfully the Reclaimer also has great shielding, so I was able to just sit there and eventually land enough hits to blow up some of these ships. But yeah, back to salvaging. At the moment, it's pretty simple. You just kind of get within range of the wreck, activate your salvage lasers, and start munching up that hull. And once you've collected 1 SU's worth of salvage, the salvage processing unit will spit out a box with the salvage in it, and then you can collect 1 more box worth of salvage before you have to go into the rear of your ship and move the box out of the way. So in the case of the Vulture, this is a pretty quick operation to just head down the ladder and move the box out of the way, which you can do with a tractor beam. And what I really loved is the fact that you can use the salvage that you've collected in the salvage processing unit to actually make a multi-tool and a tractor beam attachment, as well as a few other items, which is really useful because I forgot one on my first outing, but I wasn't stuck having to go somewhere to pick up another tractor beam because I was able to just create one in my ship. In terms of value, you probably don't want to do this because I believe these boxes of salvage are worth about 7,000 credits each, which is way more than what a multi-tool and tractor beam attachment cost, but it's still really nice to have in the event that you forgot one, so you don't have to disrupt your gameplay, because you do have to move these boxes out of the way. And something you can see when you're moving these boxes is another new feature of 3.18, which is the cargo refactor. So this includes the way that ship cargo is assigned to grids. It also allows for more piracy now because you can actually steal these boxes from other ships once they're disabled. So hopefully we'll be seeing an increase in profits from trading to counterbalance the increased viability of piracy. But yeah, I moved a decent number of boxes around while I was trying out salvaging, and it all seemed to work pretty well. This is another nice addition, and it really makes it seem like the systems are coming together in a good way. But yeah, like I mentioned with the Reclaimer, if you're flying solo like I was here, it is quite a hike from the salvage operator seats all the way over to the salvage processing deck. But the good thing is you get 2 of those salvage operator stations, so you can fill up 4 SU worth of boxes before you have to go move it all onto the elevator, and then you can move it into the cargo hold. And again, I didn't really have any issues with moving the cargo itself. No weirdness with the boxes glitching through the floor like I would have expected from past experiences with elevators. Although I did have the salvage processor units get stuck in a full state. Thankfully this was at the end of a salvage run that I was doing, but if it had happened at the beginning, it would have been pretty annoying because I wouldn't have been able to eject the salvage that was being stored in there, and I wouldn't have been able to collect any more. And yeah, when I was trying out the Reclaimer, I did happen to do a little bit of insurance fraud by spawning my own Starfarer to salvage. I think they're going to have systems in place in the future to stop you from doing this, but it's still kind of funny that you can do this at the moment. But yeah, I didn't even thoroughly scrape the entire hull of the Starfarer, and I still ended up with 100,000 credits worth of salvage. So salvage definitely pays well for the moment, and this is kind of expected because with any gameplay loop that they want tested, they're going to have the payouts be probably a little bit higher than they should be. But at least for the time being, salvage looks like it's going to be a fun and lucrative gameplay loop, especially in that situation like I described earlier where you get a couple crew members on a Reclaimer and go do some of the higher level bounty missions and then scrape the hulls of the ships that you destroy afterwards. It's an all-in-one salvage creation and processing ship at that point, and if you manage to fill that entire hold, that's going to be a lot of credits worth of salvage. So yeah, other than seeing improvements to the depth of the gameplay, like being allowed to do more than hull scraping and possibly being able to salvage specific components from the ship, which could be really fun and require you to do some sort of EVA salvaging to go and collect those items, or at least drone operation. One improvement I'd like to see that probably could be implemented a bit easier than that is for the hulls of ships to show up when you send out a ping. Especially when I destroyed smaller ships like an Origin M50, it was kind of hard to find the wreckage afterwards, especially if there's other ships in the area and you have to go deal with those before you get around to salvaging it. So again, I know I'm not the first to cover this, but my first experiences with salvage have been pretty positive, and I'm looking forward to earning some real credits with it once 3.18 goes live. But let me know what you guys think and how it's been for you. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at in this video is racing, and I think this is going to be a bit more niche of a gameplay loop, but it's still a pretty major addition. And it's nice to actually see it in the persistent universe instead of being relegated to a separate game mode that no one really touches like it was in the past. So they've added quite a few racetracks into the verse, and I believe a lot of these are influenced by community created racetracks that people just kind of decided upon beforehand, so that's cool to see. But the ones I got a chance to check out were the one around Yella, and then I did one atmospheric one, the one that's right next to Lorville. The one around Yella I tried out quite a while ago at this point, and in this most recent version of the PTU, I haven't been able to see any other races besides the one that's outside of Lorville, so I'm not entirely sure why that is. But the way these work is pretty simple. You pay a small fee to accept the race contract, which I think you always get back upon finishing the race, so as long as you don't crash into something, you won't lose any money from these at least. And then you want to make sure you get to the race and wait for the markers to spawn, because for whatever reason you can sometimes get there and have the race timer start without the checkpoint indicators actually showing up. But anyway, once you get to the starting point, you'll hear a little countdown, and then you'll get 2 sets of indicators. So one will be your nearest checkpoint, and then the next one will be the following checkpoint, which is useful and makes it so that you don't have to fully memorize the track. The payouts for these missions are relatively small, and unless you're a really good pilot and you get that platinum time every time, you're not going to be making many credits from these. But I think it is nice that they even give you any credits at all for just doing a time trial. And unlike some of the other missions, I think racing gameplay is pretty inherently fun, so it's a good way to practice getting a hang of how your ship flies, and you can maybe even make some credits if you don't blow yourself up too many times in the process. So yeah, I'm not the best racer myself, but I did try out a few of the racing ships on this track near Lorville here, the Mustang Gamma and the Origin M50, and the M50 had some weird handling behavior. Like, for some reason I couldn't get it to pitch sometimes. Even in decoupled mode, there were some instances where I was just trying to pitch and it would completely go the other direction. So I'm not sure what that was about. And then the Mustang Gamma actually had some weird rolling behavior, so even though it was pretty fast, I didn't enjoy flying it that much. And the ship that I actually enjoyed racing the most around this track was the Arrow. Now again, this could be just because I don't know what I'm doing, but if you don't happen to have a fast ship of your own and you're looking to try out this Lorville track at least, you can just head over to the spaceport in Lorville, and at the rental terminal you can get an Arrow for pretty cheap. And it's cheap enough that if you're planning to do some practicing at the track, you might even make your money back on the rental. But yeah, for my flying on both of these tracks, the target times seem to be pretty good. The platinum time was just out of reach for me on both of them, but I feel like if I really dedicated myself to practicing, I could get it occasionally, but it's definitely something of a challenge. And then all the other times are pretty reasonable and probably could be achieved in even some relatively slow ships. So yeah, I'm excited to see this get expanded, and eventually I feel like racing that isn't in the form of time trials could be very interesting. I can imagine things going very poorly if you try to go 3 wide in a turn, but in 0 gravity. So yeah, hopefully that's something we can look forward to in the future, but for now, there is a form of racing in the verse, and it's pretty good in this implementation. But again, let me know what you guys think. I want to hear what your thoughts on this are. So I didn't even really get close to covering everything that's in this update, but I'm kind of pacing myself on it because with how long it's taking, it might be a while before we get the next patch. And also a lot of the bigger changes are only something that you'd notice after playing for a while, which I tend to not do too much with the PTU. But I think it is promising that something like persistent entity streaming is working, and from my experience the stability wasn't any worse than any other patch, so the fact that the game can be recording the location of basically everything on the back end and still reach about the same level of stability is really impressive. And once we get to a point where this information can either be shared across different shards or we don't have shards anymore, it'll be nice to actually be able to leave things somewhere and know that you can come back to them. But in the meantime, it still does add stuff to the game, like the ability to rejoin the game and be in the same state you were if only your game crashed and it wasn't a server crash. That's a great quality of life improvement. And then also stuff like ships not just randomly disappearing when you step out of them because some timer has elapsed. It's great to not have to worry about that anymore, and that's only the start of what they're going to be able to do with this being in the game. Also, the performance seems to keep on getting better and better, especially when you're in space and not around too many objects. I'm consistently getting around 100 frames per second, and sometimes I even forget that I'm playing Star Citizen, so that's pretty good from an optimization standpoint. So yeah, even though it's a little bit rough that this patch is taking so long to come out, I'm glad that they're taking their time with it because it includes some really significant changes, and it's better if those get done well versus having to be redone later. So anyway, that's all I have for this video. Let me know how you guys' experiences with the PTU have been. I think it's open to everyone now, so if you're getting impatient and want to check all this out, anyone can do that at the moment. And also, if you happen to go check out the song that I released, let me know what you think of that. Again, I really appreciate you guys' support. Thanks for watching.